What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today, because of the reprint of First Movement Solo, which has gone from a £15 super to a £2 to £3 quarter century rare, I thought I would bring you a budget Melodious build so you can see what you need to be putting together in order to build this deck. The best thing about it is you can build this entire deck that I'm going to show you for well under $100, and it can compete. If you know how to play this deck, it is very, very powerful, very, very fun, and it is so low resource into what it kind of puts on the board that it allows you to play such a huge range of either board breakers, hand traps, or a mixture of both. So, with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. I'm going to dive headfirst into the profile, show you what we've got, explain why we've got it, so that you have a starting point if you do want to be putting this deck together going forward and not massively want to worry about investing hugely into the new format. So you do start off with Triple Refrain. This card is absolutely insane. This is like an ideal starter, but of course you can utilize it as everything else on top of that. So this one is, if it is normal or special, you get to add a Melodious monster from the deck to the hand except itself, and that's where it combos off with Coplet. Because when Coplet is added to the hand, except by drawing it, you can reveal this card to special on a level 4 alarm Melodious monster from the hand or graveyard. So there's just great synergies between the two of these, which is why you then combo it off with a card like Ostinato. You just get to go absolutely ham with everything you've got, including the brand new card of Bucker. Now I say a brand new card, these actually came out a while ago, but the fact that First Movement Solo just gives you more consistency to get the deck going, it just means that it's a little bit more accessible, and it is the more recent cards that have made this deck really, really compete. Then some of the older cards on top of that as well. We do have Triple Soprano. I suppose before I move on to Soprano, actually, we should talk about why these cards are so good in more depth. So the idea is that when they're used as fusion material, they actually place themselves into the scale. So straight away, they can set themselves up for your 1 to 9 Pendulum Summon. On top of that as well, Coplet lets you search out a Crescendo, which then allows you to use monsters in your Pendulum Zones as fusion material. So it's just great synergy that circles around upon itself. Now, the reason that works out so good is when you're utilizing some of the older cards like Soprano, this one is absolutely insane because it has a when effect, but it also has a just on the field effect. So when this card is special, you get to target a Melodious monster in your graveyard, accept itself, and add it back to the hand, so you get to regain even more resource. And then on top of that as well, once per turn, you get to fusion summon a Melodious fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters you control as fusion material, including this card. Now there is a benefit and a curse. That second effect is not a once per turn, which is absolutely amazing. However, the first effect is a once per turn, so if you special summon it via other means and then you special summon it via Pendulum Summon, you don't get to add back from the graveyard both times. But the idea is it lets you regain your resource, it lets you set up one of the most powerful hand traps that this deck can play in the form of the Herald of the Orange Light, which I feel is just absolutely insane because Gamma is at 1, whereas Herald of the Orange Light is not. The card is still incredibly good. It was actually, I believe, at 1 at some point. The other is this deck can utilize that card, which gives them their own inner archetypal Gamma, which is absolutely insane because it allows them to protect their plays even more. Not to mention all the other fusion monsters that let them dodge stuff like targeted effects, negated effects, and of course allow them to dodge stuff like Nibiru's as well. Then we are playing Triple Sonata, so this is obviously the other expensive kind of basic common just because it's desperate for a reprint. I'm hoping that these will be reprinted in Bonanza or just an OTS pack in general, but this one is, as long as you control a Melodious monster, you get to special summon it from the hand, and then while this special summon card is on the field, all fairy type monsters you control gain 500 attack and defense. So it starts to turn all of your Melodious monsters into mini boss monsters, and the best thing about it is, as long as you control another Melodious, you can just special, and special, which is why you can play 3 of this without really needing to worry too much. The other one-offs that we play is the 1 Cannon. So this one is if you control Melodious, again you get to special summon it, but you can only special summon it once per turn. And then, well, that way specifically. And then once per turn you get to target a Melodious monster you control and change its battle position. So the best thing about that is, again, it just acts as a free extender as a level 4 should you want to be going down that route. You can cut it out completely if you wanted to, but honestly I quite like playing the 1 Cannon and the 1 Aria. Now the reason that we play this one is as well is while this special summon card is on the field, Melodious monsters you control cannot be targeted by card effects and cannot be destroyed by battle. So the best thing about that is when you're kind of comboing it off with something like a Sonata, and multiple Sonatas will buff your monsters in more ways, you'll be able to set up a very decent 1700 to 22, if not even up to 3700 defender in the form of the Aria, and then all of your Melodious can't be destroyed by battle, and they can't be destroyed, targeted by card effects. So it means that they have to get a board breaking destruction card in resolution in order to do so, and you have other ways to dodge the board and everything else with the more recent card in the form of the Flowering Etelet as well, which is insane. The last one we play is the one Sofina, the Melodious Maestro, sorry. You can actually play this at 2 if you wanted to. Again, it's one of them older cards that is just desperate for a reprint. But right now, when you're looking at stuff like First Movement Solo, which really did hold the deck back at being £15 a copy, now that that is more accessible, you should, if you pick these up earlier, be able to pick them up for like £1 a copy. Now they're a couple of quid each, maybe £5 at most on the Sonata, but you can reduce the Sonata if you need to, and then that's when you just open yourself up for more concertos or more consistency cards as well. So the Subpoena has the ability that once per turn, target a light fairy monster in your graveyard and add it to the hand. You cannot activate non-light monster effects during the turn you activate this effect. So that's really important when you're looking at some of your extra deck monsters and maybe some of your main deck monsters, but more times than not, those main deck monsters that are not light are going to be hand traps that are going to allow you to be utilized during your opponent's turn. The best thing about that is Subpoena is a soft once per turn, so if you were to get it off the board and then bring it back in one way or another, you get to do it again, and then you add in a card back to the hand, which is why you get more consistency to get the coplet back to the hand if it does get stopped as you're trying to build your plays. And then the best card in the entire deck, in my opinion, is just a shame that it's not actually officially a Melodious card, is Ostinato. Now, the reason that this is a shame it's not a Melodious card, but also understandably so that it's not a Melodious card, is if you control no fusion summon, if you control no monsters, you get to fusion summon one Melodious fusion monster from your extra deck using 2 monsters from your hand and or deck as fusion material. During the end phase of this turn, destroy that monster, fusion summon by this effect, and if you do, and all of its fusion materials that we use for it are in the graveyard, you get to special summon them. Now, it's very rare that that effect comes into play, because more times than not, you're using Ostinato to make your Baka. Baka is then going to work its way into the graveyard, revive a card from the graveyard, and everything else in between. So Ostinato is just absolutely insane, and the fact that it's not being a Melodious card means it's not easily accessible, but it's one of the ones that if you draw into it off a Pot of Prosperity or you hard open it, you're going to have a good time, unless your opponent has an Ash and a Bell, and even then, when they use that Ash and a Bell on this, you still then have other cards like your First Movement Solo that will allow you to utilize and play around those cards even more. So this one is, again, if you control no monsters, you get to special summon a level 4 or lower Melodious monster from your hand or deck, but you can only activate one First Movement Solo per turn, and you cannot special summon monsters during the turn you activate this effect except Melodious monsters. So again, this is why you kind of want to be making this deck more pure now. In the past, people were utilizing Ostinato as an engine in stuff like Voiceless Voice or Chimera. Now you don't even need to really do that, and you don't need to try and replace the First Movement Solo, because now you can play this out. You can actually just go full on pure Melodious, and the deck is just absolutely insane, which is what I mentioned at the start, that it just has so much free space to play board breakers and hand traps. It really does give it that competitive edge that, again, I feel it's kind of drifted out of the format without having any direct hits, but it's one of them ones that eventually, as time goes by and people forget about it, when it gets brought back, it can still do incredibly powerful things, and because that open space allows it to play so many different hand traps, board breakers and everything else in between, it does have that ability to help you go first or second, as well as maintain that competitive consistency that you might be looking for. The last Melodious S card, and this is the only one that is technically a Melodious card, so it's the only one that is technically searchable. You get to fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand, field, and or pendulum zones. If a Melodious fusion monster or monsters is sent to your graveyard while this card is in the graveyard, except during a damage step, place it on the bottom of the deck and draw one card. You can only use each effect once per turn. Now, you can play 2 of this if you want to. If you were to play 2, you could arguably cut out a Pot of Prosperity, but I still quite like this as a consistency card, because if you activate Prosperity into either First Movement Solo or an Ostinato, you're in very good stead because they are your 1-card power cards, and in the past you were digging just for Ostinato, whereas now you can dig for either First Movement or Ostinato, and that will still get your combos ticking, which is absolutely mental for a deck like this. Moving on to the hand traps and board breaker-esque cards, I decided to go with, instead of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, I've gone with Dominus Purge. Now, obviously, if this is a little bit out of your budget, because these are about £8 to £10 a copy, you can very easily be putting in Ash Blossoms for this. I just wanted to show this card off, as it is an option that the deck can play. It's one of them ones that allows you to play around Trill Tactic talents a little bit more. There are ways when you are playing some of the other hand traps I'm going to show you that you will run into them, but the only clash that this has with the deck is it means you can't play Bestials and you can't really play Ash Blossoms. Yes, of course, you can still play them. You would just need to activate them and resolve them before you activate this card, if you activate it from the hand to be specific, but I do always quite like decks that can utilize a card like this. So if your opponent controls a card, you get to activate this card from the hand, and then when a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that adds a card or cards from the deck to the hand, you negate that effect, and if you have a trap card in the graveyard, you destroy it. If you activate this card from the hand, you cannot activate the effects of Dark Water and Fire monsters for the rest of the duel, but you can only activate one Dominus Purge per turn. So again, like I said, very easy. Sub this out for Ash Blossom if you want to. I just quite like the idea of being able to utilize a card like Imperm and then Dominus Purge before you run into Triple Tactic Talents, as I do feel that, especially when we get into the new format with the brand new Flundereeze card, that is going to be a mainstay staple, and I feel that a lot of people are going to be utilizing that card. And that's one thing you could also consider with the deck, is playing Called by the Grave. But honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of if I draw that Sakia 1-of in my 40 card deck to protect me from a direct hand trap in the form of the Flundereeze or in the form of the Shifter, that I'm going to rely on that. I still want to be able to make sure that I have plays to make, even if I'm under any of those particular types of interruptions. Then for the rest of the hand traps, obviously talking about the best card that this deck can play is the Herald of the Orange Light. So when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you get to send this card and one other fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. The best thing about it is not a hard once per turn, so if you do have more fairies in the hand, which you will be able to regain that resource through all the rest of your Melodious monsters, you're going to be able to use it over and over and over again. Obviously, you'd use the first one, then if you open up a second copy, you use a second copy. Yes, you do burn through your hand advantage, but the idea is when you're playing a card like this, which is just an outright monster negate and destroy, it does give you that benefit that you could also consider something like Ghost Ogre as well. So for the other hand traps we're playing is 2 Ghost Bell and 2 Ghost Mourner. Like I said, Ghost Ogre can very easily go into here as well. You can very also, on top of that, put in Effect Veilers, but instead of going for stuff like Effect Veilers and Ashes and of course the other kind of hand traps you can play, I decided to go with a balance of Board Breakers. So for the last of the technical hand traps, I'm playing Triple Infinite Impermanence. Apologies for the different sleeves, it's currently bouncing between a couple of different decks like Tempai and Yugioh. But you play Triple Infinite Impermanence, and then I decided to go with 5 board breaking cards rather than Ghost Ogres and Veilers, and I decided to go with Triple Forbidden Droplet, probably like the best card going second. You're playing a nice balance with stuff like Dominus Purge as trap cards as well, and the best benefit of something like Dominus Purge is if they try and search during your turn, yes, of course you could Ash them, but then they could have a Call by the Grave, you can just go Dominus Purge them instead. So we've got 2 Forbidden Droplets, and I went with 2 Book of Eclipses. And the reason I went with this is if my opponent does draw into Board Breakers, I can still set these. And unless that Board Breaker is something insane like an Evenly Matched, and even if it is, as long as you've got the Flowering on the board, you Flowering, bounce out all of your monsters, or as many of your cards as you possibly can, and then you can still sit back on something like a Book of Eclipse, which can really stump your opponent if they're trying to go into link plays or anything else like that. So that's it for the entire main deck. Like I said, the hand traps are completely up to you. I think Herald of the Orange Light is a must. I just think it's so good when a deck can utilize that card, whereas everything else then becomes flexibility. No Dominus, play Ashes, and then you can start utilizing other board breakers if you want to. You just kind of want to look for board breakers that are going to be useful going first and or second. Moving on to the extra deck, of course, we do have the insane Triple Bucker. I really want this card to be coming in a foil. I do think it's really, really kind of cool. So this one is, while you control this Fusion Summon card, the activated effects of your Melodious Fusion monsters cannot be negated. Now, what you need to remember about these is you can actually activate Imperm on Bucker, because Imperm doesn't negate the activated effect, it negates all of the effects. So that's how you can that's how it kind of hurts. But if they don't know about that and they're trying to activate other cards, such as Ash Blossom, that negate the effect, not all of the effects, and try to negate the activated effect, your Bucker will protect it, which is really kind of nice. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn. If this card is special summoned, you get to special summon a Melodious monster from the deck. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to target a Melodious monster in your graveyard, accept itself, and special summon it in defense. And then my favourite one is Flowering. Now the reason this one's so good is it does require a Maestro monster, whereas obviously the Barker just requires Melodious monsters. This one requires a Maestro and of course 2 Melodious, but it has a quick effect to banish this card until the end phase, and then any number of Melodious monsters you control. Then you can return up to that many face-up cards your opponent controls to the hand. You can only use this effect once per turn, and then if this face-up Fusion Summon card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you get to special summon 1 Melodious monster from the deck or extra deck, except itself. So that ability to tag out is really, really important because it lets you tag out first. So if they do activate a Nibiru or something, you tag out, and then you can return their Nibiru on resolution, which is really kind of cool, because yes, you give them back a Nibiru, but then they give you a fat stack token if it does tribute anything. If it doesn't tribute anything, they don't get a Nibiru, you don't get a token, and they just have to sit there with a Nibiru in the hand, and then in the end phase, these are all going to come back. Speaking of bouncing stuff off your board and coming back, what you're going to get the most benefit of if you're using Flowering is when you use it on Shiberta. Now, this one requires just 2 Melodious monsters, and during either player's turn, you get to target up to 3 cards in any graveyards and banish them. And if you do, this card gains 200 attack for each card. The effect can only be used once while it's face up on the field, which is why it's great, because then when you combo it off with Flower and you bounce this out and then bring it back, its effect is reset. So you don't need to always worry about going into more and more copies of it. And the fact of the matter is they're soft once per turn. So if you have 2 on the board, which usually more times than not is what people are ending their combos with, you can actually DD Crow technically 6 cards, which is insane when you're looking at stuff like the Engraver combo that's going to use Requiem and everything else in between that one. And then you've got the Yubel matchup, which wants to be using Yubel, Spirit. They also want to end up using, they want to recycle their Phantoms. There's cards when they're trying to activate Bestials. You can activate Shiberta to banish the target so that they can't get the Bestials down to the board. And then, of course, you can hit Grey Squirmers, Yamas, Rages, and everything else in between. The last 2 that I'm playing that are direct fusion monsters for the Melodious cards are, of course, 1 Bloom Prima and 1 Bloom Diva. Now, you don't have to play these, but I feel in a pure version, you just have that space that you might as well. So the Prima is a Maestro plus 1 or more Melodious, and it gains 300 attack for each fusion material used for its fusion summon. This card gets to make a second attack during each battle phase, and then if this fusion summon card is sent to the graveyard, you get to target a Melodious monster in your graveyard and add it back to the hand. But the idea is when you're comboing this off, it's going to be able to get a nice little buff at the base minimum. You're going to be using 2, so it's going to get a buff up to 25. But on top of that, as well as if you have your Sonata in play, your Sonata is going to be able to buff it again by another 500. So it's going to be going up by 15, if not more, if you have more Sonatas on the board. And it just becomes a very nice, strong monster that can attack twice. And then with your Bloom Diva, so this one cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect, and you take no battle damage from attacks involving this card. If this card battles a special monster, also during damage calculation, after damage calculation, you get to inflict damage to your opponent equal to the difference between the original attack of that monster and this monster and this card. And if you do, destroy that opponent's monster. So if their monster can't be destroyed by battle or anything like that, or they're trying to put it in defense, you get to attack with the Bloom Diva. And then the best thing about that one is even though, as long as it attacks involving this card, even though that monster can't be destroyed, you get to destroy it by card effect, and it obviously gets to float. So in the Yubel matchup, that's something you want to be looking for. But the other is that this can still clear off those cards, so it's not just an auto lose as soon as you are forced to go to the battle phase with the Nightmare Pain in rotation. The last 2 Melodious monsters that we play for the extra deck is your Bloom Harmonist. So this one requires 2 fairy monsters, and if this card is link summoned, you get to discard 1 card to special summon 2 Melodious monsters with different levels from the deck to zones this card points to. Now obviously that's the biggest downside, is it has to go to the zones it points to, and they have to go into defense. You can't special summon monsters for the turn you activate this effect except Melodious monsters, and you're going to use each effect once per turn. If a Melodious monster this card points to attacks, your opponent cannot activate card effects until the end of the damage step. So again, very important if they're trying to float with their Yubels and you've negated them and you're just going to crash through them. The last cards we are playing is the 1 Gravity Controller. So this is just to turn your Bucket and the extra monster zone into the Gravity Controller to trigger its graveyard effect if it does get impermed or stopped. We're then playing the 1 Haggard Lizard. Now the reason that this is so good is it just requires 2 monsters with different names, and you get to banish a monster from your face-up field or graveyard, obviously including itself, and then target 1 face-up monster on the field, and you make its attack become equal to its original attack of the monster banished. And then the best thing about that is if you banish the monster that was originally Reptile, you get to draw 1 card. So the other is you're basically clearing your board off. You're getting a draw for the back of the Haggard Lizard. And if you draw into an Ostinato, you're going to be able to activate that. You won't be able to activate first movement solo as you are locked into Melodious for the entire turn when you try to activate that. But the idea is that your Haggard Lizard is going to give you Ostinato, and that just lets your combo continue. The last 2 cards that we are playing is the 1 Moon of the Closed Heavens and the 1 Underworld Goddess. This is just to deal with towers. Honestly, the 2 cards I'd want to be putting into here would be Baguska, and I just didn't have a copy on me at the time of recording this video. And then the other one is the Fairy Link 2, which is like one of the Agents of Creation, which basically lets you tribute the agent to destroy 1 card on the field, and it's how you kind of out stuff like Skill Drain and Floodgates and everything else in between if you're able to get to it. So that's it for the entire profile. I hope I've gone into as much depth as possible just so you can kind of understand where you can start with this deck. Now, by all means, this is not the best Melodious deck ever made. This is just a version of the deck that you can put together as long as you see the baseline of what you need, which is basically all the Melodious monsters that I showed you, or the Melodious cards plus Ostinato and First Movement Solo that I showed you at the start of the profile. From that point on, it's entirely up to you. You could make it a full-on go second OTK version of the deck. You could make it a full-on go first control version of the deck. Start adding in stuff like Silo Hat Rabbit, IP Masquerena, and not worry about Melodious locking yourself. Or you do what I've done and go, you know what, I quite like the balance of being able to go first or second. And then on top of that as well, I also do quite like the benefit of being able to play board breakers as well as hand traps and not need to worry so much about Melodious locking myself, because I'm happy to just go full combo, Melodious lock myself, and not even need to worry about getting a game loss or a warning if I do accidentally activate something under Dominus Purge or try to summon something under First Movement Solo, and so on and so forth. So that's it for the entire profile. Any questions at all, by all means, please put in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. If you want to see some dedicated combo videos for this, then let me know in the comments and I'll be more than happy to do so. But we will be having a lot of new content coming up thanks to Raid to the Abyss. We've got stuff like Pure Fire Kings coming up. We're going to have stuff like the Mimigals. We're going to have stuff like Six Samurai. And of course, we're also going to be having Goblins, as well as trying to get Sharks if we can get all the cards together, because I prefer to show you physical profiles than online profiles, as it allows me to provide you more explanation and then show you the physical cards as well, all in one tidy video. For now, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe and of course, happy dueling.